onto our brilliant speakers tonight. We have Katrina Adams with us, who is the former president and CEO of the United States Tennis Association. She has a long list of accolades, which we do not have time to get through all of, but I will quickly run through some, which is that she's the first Black woman to ever hold this position. She's the youngest person to ever hold this position, and she is the first two-term chairman and president. And she is the first former player to hold that honor. So she broke a lot of records with this, broke a lot of barriers. And alongside that, she is a broadcaster, author, and board member. So she is a jack of all trades, powerhouse of a woman, and we are delighted to have her. And she will be speaking with Damon Austin, who is an American Library in Paris trustee. He is also a career librarian, research information consultant with over 2 decades, of experience, and a professional tennis coach. So we have two tennis experts tonight, and his background includes work with academic, special, and school libraries in the USA and European outlets. Tonight, Katrina and Damon will be discussing Own the Arena, which is Katrina's book about her tenure with the United States Tennis Association and her work taking the world by large in a more global sense. In this book, Katrina shares everything that has to happen off court in order to make the game itself possible. The book, I find, is a constant lesson in effective decision-making, empathetic communication, and adaptability. Its applicability to the many different walks, matches of life has no limits, and we have so much to learn from Katrina tonight. It's such a privilege to hear your insight. Thank you both again for joining us. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Emily. And everyone can hear me well, I guess. And so thank you again. It's a delight and an honor to actually welcome Katrina Adams. She has many accolades. She's a star in the tennis world and the executive world. And I'm delighted to see her in this environment because she and I met about 18 years ago. And so this is just a real honor, delight, and pleasure for me. And so what I want to do is just get right into this. Before I do have to tell you all one thing, and I have to apologize for this. We just received, I'm in the United States. We just received notice that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management, they're going to issue some kind of a test within the next 30 minutes. A tone will be sent out. So if it interrupts, it'll just be very brief, but that is nationwide in the United States. So I apologize for that. And with that, we will get on to the delight and the delightful Katrina Adams. So welcome, Kat. How are you today?
I am wonderful. It's great to be here with Damon and to be with the people from the American Library in Paris. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so I want to start this off the way probably many of your book talks have started. Just tell us why you wrote the book and what you sought to achieve in doing so.
You know, it's very interesting. I get asked this question all the time, and I always say I never, ever intended to write a book. I never wanted to write a book. I'm a very private person. And so when people said, Kat, you need to write a book, I go, no, I have no desire to. But I had so many people that thought I had a great story to tell about leadership. And to be honest with you, I had a lot of people that kind of nudged me and pushed me. But it was really two people in particular that really pushed me that extra mile, that extra step. And it's our current USTA president, Brian Hainline, and his wife, Pascal, who introduced me to my literary agent, who actually got me started and got the ball rolling. So I really owe it to them for getting me going down the right path. And reaching out to my agent and getting me going in the right direction to start to talk about what it would mean to write a leadership book. And so I'm really grateful to them and really grateful to actually get the story out there, because it's not for me, it's not about my story. It's really about using my story to really empower others and inspire others to walk down this journey with me.
Thank you. I can tell you as a reader of the book, it wasn't what I expected. I got to, even though we've known each other for a long time, I got to know more about you. Obviously, a lot of things I didn't know. So, and that actually drew me closer to you. So I'm really thankful that you did write this book. You mentioned a lot your relationship with your parents. And there's so many things you can say, but just to get things started, can you share one or two enduring and continuously reverberating sayings that you hear, that you still hear from your parents, that sort of ushered you on your way?
I was very lucky. Growing up in a two-parent household on the west side of Chicago, growing up in an inner city, not a lot of my peers had two-parent households, but my parents were teachers. We came from middle class, a family. I had two older brothers, and where education was always first and foremost. My parents were teachers; they were educators, and so it was always about schoolwork first. So was always say, make sure you get good grades, make sure you work hard, you study hard, and everything else will follow. And that was it. And when it came to sports or athletics or extracurricular activities, it was have fun. And that's what tennis was for them. They were not tennis parents. They didn't know what tennis could bring me. It was a tennis community that kind of urged them and really talked about the opportunities that tennis would bring to me or could bring to me, and potential college scholarship. But for them, it was about making sure that I was having fun, that I was getting exercise, and that I was doing something that I loved, and I happened to be good at it. And so they continued to strive forward to provide those opportunities, make the sacrifices that were needed to make sure I had a pathway to be successful in what I did. But it was all about making sure that I had good grades, I got my homework out, and that I could do whatever I wanted to as long as I had those things in order.
That's wonderful. On that point, you had mentioned in your book that you kind of put away childish things. You wanted to not be a burden to your parents, something like maybe your other siblings were a little bit challenging in somewhat. And do you remember at such a young age what you were focused on? Once you knew you loved tennis, what were you focused on? Can you share any of that?
Well, yeah. So my brothers were 6 and 8 years older than me, or close to 7 and 9 years older than me. So, you kind of learn what not to do, right? To not get in trouble. So whatever they did, I made sure I went the other way. And tennis really gave me that outlet. That was my outlet. So, I would get out of school and I would go to practice. And from practice, I would come home, I'd have dinner, I'd get my homework out, I'd get a bath, I'd go to bed, I get up and do it all over again. So it really kept me on a straight and narrow path. And and it was something that I loved doing. So I didn't feel like I was losing out on anything. So as I got to a high school age and my friends were going to the mall, going to the movies, going to parties, I didn't think I was missing anything because I was having fun and enjoying my competitive pathway that I was on in playing tennis. And so a lot of people says, "Oh, you missed out on so much." I'm like, "No, I didn't." I'm like, "My friends missed out on a lot because, they didn't have the opportunity to do what I was doing." So I think, when I look back on what I did, I said it was perfect because it's what I did, it's what I enjoyed, it's what my parents, allowed me to do, because they worked hard for me to do it. And I think the training that I had, the discipline that I had to do that day in and day out is really what prepared me to be successful in life because of the life skills that I learned through that discipline and repetition, day in and day out, which allowed me to get good grades, which allowed me to be successful on the tennis court and and have a winning attitude. And that winning attitude in tennis is what allowed me to have a winning attitude in life.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thank you. You also there's so many things I want to ask you, and I know it's funny that our viewers are actually witnessing a conversation I wanted to have with you for about 20 years. So this is kind of like just a fun thing I'm having. And you mentioned your discipline when you were a kid, and you were also I didn't realize you were younger, a little bit younger. And one year and a half, 2 years, that's a big deal in junior tennis. And you were a bit younger, but you were also obviously very highly ranked. how did you deal with that? And can you compare the training philosophy that was implemented when you were playing versus and compare it to what we're seeing now in USTA training centers and such across the world?
Well, I grew up in Chicago. Chicago is an indoor facility town. So, we only had a couple hours a day to practice. So it was really hardcore from the first moment you stepped on the court. We didn't really have a lot of time to waste. I wasn't in a warm climate where we were practicing 3, 4, 6 hours a day, like a lot of these kids are, or in an academy where, they were there for 6 hours, 8 hours a day, focusing on tennis. Again, I went to school, I got out of school at 2:30, went home, grabbed a snack. My parents or my father really drove me to practice to try to be at practice from 4 to 6 or 5 to 7, depending on my program schedule. And from that, back in the car for an hour to get back home, to eat, do homework, and do it all over again. And so it wasn't a lot of time. So I really had to be laser focused in those 2 hours to get as much out of that training that I could. And I probably practiced 7 days a week. Maybe on the weekends, I was able to get 4 hours or maybe 3 hours, depending on the court time that we had. I do remember on the weekends, practice was maybe from 7 to 9 or 7:30 to 9:30 in the morning, and then maybe 6 to 8 in the evenings, because that's when the courts were open for the kids that was free or that was donated to us in those times before the adults got out there or after they used the courts on the weekends. So I got a little more time as I was developing and being more competitive. So I had to utilize the court time as it was given to me, more so than other academies as we see today. And I think that was part of it too. For many of us that are coming from colder climates, you really have to be laser focused and be a little more disciplined and take advantage of the time that we have.
Yeah, and that's a theme that goes through your book, and we'll obviously seg into that. One other thing I want to ask you a little bit more about your youth coming up, your formative years, and you mentioned it when you began tennis. You didn't know it was a predominantly white sport. Because of the environment. Perhaps many of the people here won't. I don't know who's watching, but joining us. But can you kind of explain what you mean by that? You didn't know that tennis was a predominantly white sport, and can you imagine that reality now, or is it a remnant of a time past in terms of race?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in a Black neighborhood. So my first program, the summer program, all the kids were Black, the coaches were Black. I grew up in a park. It was a park program. And so that was my introduction to the sport. The coach that took me under his wing was a Black coach. The next place that I went to and practiced, took lessons on the weekend, was a Black environment. During the winter, I played on the weekends. It was a Black program. The next summer, I played in a Black program. My very first tournament was the ATA Nationals, which is the American Tennis Association, which is a historically Black organization. And so everybody there, 99% of the people were Black. So it was normal for me to be in that environment. It wasn't until I started playing in our USTA tournaments and I showed up and I was practically the only Black person there. And I'm kind of looking around and going, where is everyone? And, my dad is like, or my parents were like, it's okay, just go out there and play and do your best. And so I wasn't raised to talk about, my parents didn't really talk about Black and white or the difference, because they worked with all ethnicities and races, and we visited each other's families. So I went out there and just played and continued to win and develop. So it was like over time, I kind of realized that, oh, okay, this is normal. And so I didn't know the difference. And so when I talk, when you reflect and you look back on it, and you only know what people talk about. So over time, when people start to talk about, as I get older, and you hear, oh, this is a predominantly white sport, I go, oh, this is what they mean. As a kid, you only know what you know. And so that's what I meant when I wrote that in the book. And I find it fascinating as I got older how, people differentiate, or you start to put things or people or programs in silos, as we unfortunately do in life.
Oh, so insightful. And you mentioned when you went away to College of Northwestern, um, were you the only African American on the team? And how were you received, and how did you get along with your teammates? And do you have enduring friendships with them?
Yeah, of course, I was the only African American on the team, but I mean, when you grow up in tennis, I was used to that. So as I traveled and started to be, played at national tournaments, I was generally the only Black girl at the tournaments. So, you know, I didn't, I never felt indifferent to any of my other peers out there, because we were all out there playing tennis and competing to do the same things. I think it's how you're raised. I never felt inferior to anyone. I never felt racism from any of my other competitors growing up. I think, we talk a lot more about race today than we did probably in the 80s, when I was playing nationally. It's not something that kids ever even talked about. We didn't really talk about Black or white back then, or any other race for that matter, as much as it's talked about today in today's society. So, yeah, even when I was on the national teams, I was the only Black girl that was out there traveling around, with 5 or 6 other players and a coach. So it was really no different for me when I entered Northwestern University, being the only Black girl or Black player on the team, and being successful. I went in as a freshman and earned the #1 position, became Rookie of the Year nationally, and so that was great. And then sophomore year, winning NCAA's with my doubles partner Diane Donnelly, before going off and becoming a turning pro on the WTA tour and playing for 12 years after that. So that was normal for me. Continues to be normal in the environment that I live in today, in the sport that I live in today. But excited to see that there's so many more players of color that are playing in the college game as well as out on the professional tour.
Right, right. And I don't remember her name. And it's interesting. Just a few years ago, the first African American or Black female won the singles national championship. I think she was the first one to achieve that, and didn't even realize it. So that, in a way, that marks kind of how far society's gone.
Minor from Michigan.
Yes, exactly. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, that's up your way. And you say in your book that I'm going to read this. So it says, in America, most white people rare exposure to Black people is through news programs, not on a regular personal level. And so I'm asking you, do you observe some sort of movement toward change, a significant change in that at the executive level, or even before we get to the executive, the tennis environment, at the executive tennis levels and coaching levels?
Well, I think, when I retired, I became a national coach for the USTA. And I joined, at the time, Carol Watson, African American woman, was a national coach. Rodney Harmon, African American male, was a national coach, and Jean Desdunes. There were several Black men and women that were national coaches at the time. So Brian Shelton was a national coach. He had just transitioned to be the head coach at Georgia Tech for the women's team at that time. So we had several coaches. Several is kind of small when you think about it, in number, but there were some coaches that were there at the time. So I wasn't the first at that time, but we still are small in number. It's still a need to get more Black men and women or coaches of color at the national level out there. It's a number that we continue to thrive on and need to grow. But so it's something that I continue to work on. When I became the president of the USTA, I really focused on different groups of coaches: women, Hispanic, African American, and trying to diversify the numbers and be more inclusive, and make sure that we were expanding in those numbers here in the US to make sure that they knew they were seen, that they were being heard, and that they had the resources that were necessary to be able to grow. And I think a lot of it is miscommunication or just not understanding that there are opportunities out there because of history. And we unfortunately get stuck in the past in assuming or making assumptions that there aren't opportunities there. But if you're not seeking the opportunities or looking for the doors that are open, you don't realize that you can walk through them. And so I think today they've done a great job, they meaning the USTA, and USPTA and PTR for that matter, and welcoming and opening doors for diversity and inclusion in the coaching world. And for myself, having been on the board of directors for the ITF and the chair of the Advantage All Committee, I'm all about diversity and gender equity and making sure that we're trying to expand and be more inclusive, particularly on the gender side, and getting more women coaches in our game. Only 21% of coaches globally are women. That's not enough. And I think only in America are we at 22 or 23% of women. So these are areas that I'm really trying to focus on. I'll continue to work hard on and making sure that we can grow these numbers in our coaching side.
Yeah, I was actually it's that this is organically moving forward, which is wonderful because my next question is going to be: do we need more coaches for female professionals? Do we need more female coaches for female professional players, as well as female coaches for male professional players? And how might we affect that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think we should just identify female coaches for female players. I think we need women coaches, period, who can work both with men and women. I mean, if you look back and you think about, Andy Murray has been a huge advocate for women coaches. His mom was a great coach for himself and for his brother Jamie Murray. Andy was number one male player in the world. His brother was number one doubles player in the world. And Andy hired Emilie Mauresmo to be his coach at one point. So he's a huge advocate for women coaches. And I think we really need to understand that it's about communication and understanding the game, which is what makes a great coach. It's not about men with men, women with women. But the opportunities need to be there. The doors need to be open. Yes, there is a challenge, I think, for a lot of women just because of players or coaches who go off and start families, and the time commitment may not be there. But if we can create opportunities at the tournaments for nurseries, et cetera, if they have kids, to be able to bring those kids along, then I think we can create the opportunities for them to continue to be the parents that they are, as well as being the great coaches that they are.
Right. So it seems that it just takes some creative thinking to deal with all these different scenarios, and everyone can be accommodated at some level, and we can move the game forward.
Yeah, because they have the nurseries and creches for the players. Why not have them for the coaches as well?
That's right. That's right. You mentioned in your book, you've always had a silent yet unwavering belief in yourself as a leader. Where would you say that comes from? And has that characteristic been easy to maintain?
So I like to say it's kind of innate. I think I was born with it, according to my mother. She said it was something that she recognized in me from a very young age, and just being confident, and always knowing where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. But I think it's something that it was nurtured from my parents as well, and making me believe that I could do anything that I wanted to do. And so it's why I credit my parents a lot. I credit my family members and really my community. So when I started playing tennis and showing that I had promise as a competitive player, again, nobody knew what professional tennis was in store for me as a adolescent or as a teenager, even back in the 70s and 80s. But we knew that it was something that I was good at. And so when you have that kind of support system behind you, and and I was a good student, it just allowed me to walk a little bit taller and a little bit straighter and with my head up high, to believe that I could accomplish anything. And so I credit all those people that pushed me forward, that lifted me up, to allow me to believe in myself and to work a little bit harder day in and day out to build that core belief system. And I credit tennis itself and the life skills that I've learned from it to give me that core confidence. And so everything that I do, I believe that I can be successful in it, and I believe that I can make a difference in everything that I do. And so as I navigate through life and I go from one level to the next, and from, no matter what I'm doing, I believe that I can succeed. And so I've been very fortunate in the space that I've been in, particularly in sport, even more specifically in tennis and in the business of tennis. The networking that I've done, the people that I've worked with, not just here in the US, but on a global level, I've been very successful. And so, I continue to build that confidence and spreading the goodwill and the belief that I have and navigating the system.
No, that's actually really important. And before I get to sort of get to that point, there was something in your book that really made me wonder. You were very courageous and candid about sharing a health issue you had when you were a young player, a junior, I believe, and how you ended up a trip to the hospital turned out very different and was a life-changing type of event, potentially life-changing. And can you imagine a female player, or any player really, going through that type of scenario in such relative silence these days? I guess when you reflect on that, is that something you think about? Like how might a young person navigate that these days? Or would that even be possible given the awareness that we have around female issues? Or maybe we think we're a little bit more evolved than we are. So that's my
Yeah,
question.
sure. I mean, I think every day somebody is probably going through what I went through, and when you talk about a teenager dealing with a reproductive issue, as I did, that, really affected my ability to reproduce or not reproduce, knowing that at a young age. I think when I look back in the 80s and not really, really didn't understand the long-term impact that it would have, or I just refused to focus on it. And I put all my energy into doing what I did on the tennis court. And so until I became of age to where it really mattered, did it really impact me? And so I could honestly say today that would be a mental health issue,
Mhm.
because I didn't really address it then or know how to address it. And I suppressed the emotions behind it that become a mental health issue because I didn't talk about it. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to address it. And so, because sport forces us to keep moving. And so, when I think about all of the topics that we deal with today or the athletes deal with today, talking about mental health, we all go through these mental health issues without even recognizing it or realizing it. And so I would say that every day there is a female or male athlete going through something that happened, something physically that has affected them mentally, but they've had to suppress it to move forward, to be competitive, and to continue to be successful in whatever it is that they're doing. And maybe not an athlete, just a normal business person who has had to put something aside and put it in Pandora's box to move forward, and lock the key, because they didn't have time to perhaps deal with it.
You mentioned holding yourself to a higher standard as a Black woman, and that paid huge real currency and huge dividends for you. In terms of your toughness, and as we transition into, because we're running out of time, this is such a wonderful conversation. We're running short on time. So in terms of your mental toughness, your physical toughness as a professional athlete and all, and your training, but as well as bolstering your executive acumen, how is holding yourself to a higher standard, specifically or particularly as a Black woman, how has that manifested itself in real terms for you?
Well, I think it's huge because I think, unless, someone said, I don't know if it's Billie Jean King has said this, but unless you have been excluded, you don't know what being included means. And so as a minority, as a female, and as a Black woman, you understand what being excluded feels like. So to be included, you understand the importance of that even more so. So I understand that all eyes were on me, particularly at the highest level of our sport and at the head of the USTA. And because I was a visual person that represent the organization, that every time I was on camera, all eyes were on me. And so I had to triple cross my T's and triple dot my I's and make sure that I was representing the organization extremely well, more so than any of my predecessors. I had to represent myself, I had to represent the organization, I had to represent a culture and a race of people and a gender, and be at my best at all times. So that was even more pressure for me than I think any of my predecessors, male or female, for that matter. And still today, no matter what I do, I understand, even sitting here, what my responsibility is and what my pressures are. And so when I talk about the things in my book, Own the Arena, and I talk about my 12 match points, there are three that stand out for me. And the three most important ones are own your courage, own your voice, and own your identity. Because I have to have the courage to be able to go out and step out on a limb day in and day out to do the things that I do. I have to be able to own my voice, to be able to speak up and speak out for myself and for others. And I have to be able to own my identity as a woman, as a person of color, as an African American, to be able to speak for everyone. And so those are the three most important winning match points for me, because without those, I can't own the table. I can't own my successes. I can't own my losses. I can't own my obligations or my possibilities or any of the other match points that I talk about within the book. And those are critical in how I've been able to be successful, because as my subtitle says, I own the arena because I want to make sure that I'm making a difference, getting ahead and succeed, because I've made a difference, gotten ahead and been successful as the only one, because I've been the only woman in the room. I've been the only person of color in the room. I've been the only Black person in the room. And I continue to do that as I navigate through this world of tennis in particular, sport and business at the highest level.
That's wonderful. You actually segued through several of the questions that I wanted to ask, and I want to get to, because we're running out of time, I want to get to a little bit of the executive part. So can you share one or two of your favorite aspects for you of honing your executive skills? Like, could you walk up to a group of kids and say, you might be a future executive if you can fill in the blank?
I think when you're talking to kids, it's all about making sure that no matter what they're doing, they're enjoying the process. I think in today's society, kids want to be CEOs, or the young people want to be CEOs within the first month or first year of their new job, because they think they know it all, right? So it's all about process. It's all about learning how to first be an employee, first being a team member, learning how to work together before they can be a leader. I think we all have the ability to be natural born leaders. So when you're talking to kids, One, it's learning how to have fun, learning how to enjoy the process, learning how to communicate, learning how to network, and learning how to play in the sandbox. Because too many of our kids don't know how to play in the sandbox because they only play on their digital devices. Therefore, they're not learning how to communicate with one another. They're not having eye contact with one another. And I think that's really is going to break down our societal skills that will be needed to be successful in the long run.
Skill and empathetic communication and communication. Yeah. Can you share like one or two pivotal moments from your executive career where you found yourself respected enough to own your role? And you might draw from something from the USTA, or because you have, as you mentioned, you were seen as a visionary, a motivator, and someone who offered guidance.
Oh, wow, that's a difficult one. I mean, I think I can't say it's one moment or the other. I mean, I've always prided myself in always being a team player. Um, I had an amazing team that surrounded me at the USTA, an amazing team that I worked with, um, at the ITF level, as chairpersons of several committees. And so it's not about me, it's about everyone around me, whether it's staff people or committee members. And so I can't identify one thing. I think it's more of how I've handled situations and speaking to one another, and allowing other people to be the leaders that they are. I'm not someone to dictate. I'm one to try to delegate and allow others to be the leaders and step up. And if they make mistakes, they make mistakes because that's how you learn. You learn more from your losses than you do your successes. And I think that's the most important thing we can do. And that's what I've learned from sport, more so than anything.
Before I forget, I want to ask you one question. How have you changed since writing this book?
How have I changed? You know what? People don't change, people evolve. So I think the evolution process is in writing the book. I've learned a lot about myself because I had to do a lot of reflection. And in that reflection, I realized that I didn't get here by myself. I think we take a lot of pride sometimes in saying, yeah, I did this, I did that, when in fact it's more of we. And in that process of we, I had to think back on who those we were or who those we are. Um, I've learned in the process that, we have a village and we have networks. Your village are your family and friends who are there to pat you on the back and support you no matter what. Your network are your business people that you can lean on and talk to and navigate and the mentors and sponsors that are there for you. And then I like to say I have a personal board, and that personal board are those professionals that are friends that I can pick up the phone and call and really talk about some ideas and thought processes that or deep dive with them and really get some honest answers from them to say, hey, you're going down the right path, or you might want to truly rethink that. Particularly if I'm in a meeting that could be a confidential process, and I can say, hey, this was proposed to me today. I'm not really sure about this because this is not my expertise. This is your expertise. And they'll say, hey, that's a great, they're spot on, go with it. Or, maybe you want to ask this question or that question, but I think this is a great idea. Or they'll say, hey, they're pulling your leg. That is not, you want to ask this question or that question, but that is not, they're just trying to get over on you because they want this to happen. I don't think that's great for your business or that business. So you want to have your personal board, and that's 3 to 5 people maybe. But understanding, this book has really allowed me to understand, I think, myself more, but also to expand to figure out where I want to go in the future.
That's wonderful. I have about 10 more questions, but I can't ask them, right? So we'll set up a time where I can ask them. But one question about women, women in the sport of tennis. So what's something you think can be done to bring further acknowledgement to the legacy of women as invaluable contributors to the tennis industry?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I was reading the chat.
So,
Sorry.
so, so women in the legacy of tennis and women's role in the legacy of tennis. What can be done to bring more recognition to women in their legacy in the game of tennis?
So we're in our 50th year of the WTA tour, of which Billie Jean King and others founded. We're in the 50th year of equal prize money of the U.S. Open, of which, took years for the other Grand Slams to follow and to match. So, as the slogan of Virginia Slams back in the day was, "We've come a long way, baby," but we still have a long way to go in that regard. I think when it comes to where we are doing a great job. I think the generation of players today are taking ownership of the sport. They're taking ownership of their voice. They're taking ownership of the future, as did their predecessors did. But I think with a lot more gusto, if you will, maybe because the platforms are different and because social media allows them to speak with more volume. It's just a matter of who's actually listening. And so I think when we look at our sport, we continue to be the leaders in women's sport, and other sports are following. So hopefully when we look at the other sports, they continue to gain muscle, if you will, and continue to speak up and speak out for what is right, what is needed to have parity and equality for them, because they're still behind when it comes to their male counterparts in the other sports, and it's not right. They're out there working their asses off like everybody else, and doing better in so many regards and respects within their own sports. So, and in business as well, we need to have more CEOs. We don't have enough women in leadership roles. We need more male allies within business to really speak up and speak out for what we do well in business, in our leadership roles, to reach back and pull us forward and to speak positively. It's still the good old boy network, and way too many fields, and it's that has got to change. So until we can break down the barriers in the good old boy network and get more women in these roles so that we can support one another, we're going to continue to have challenges.
No, thank you. That was very rich. You mentioned I'm going to ask one more question, but you mentioned one of your colleagues you felt was had a little bit of the good old boy philosophy, and you addressed that. And I'll leave the readers to sort of address that, or probably someone may ask a question about it. But I want to finish the questions I have for the moment more on a lighter note. Do you recall the year bathroom breaks began were allowed on tour? When the year of bathroom breaks were allowed on tour? I don't remember the year, and I didn't research it, so I figured you had a little anecdote about that, where Zena told you go to the bathroom, and you didn't know you could go. So
yeah, I don't remember. I don't know when the bathroom breaks were allowed. I mean, they probably were allowed even. Listen, I was a rookie, so this was 1988. I probably just didn't know the rules that I could go, or and I was on an outside court, which is way away from the bathroom. But it's just understanding the rules, and knowing what you can and couldn't do, right? What you could and couldn't do. But it's important. I mean, I had another incident probably in 93 or 92, 93. That was even more important, that I didn't take advantage of and wish I had, that cost me the match, out of fear and nervousness, and couldn't move because I had a malfunction. And I think back on that and said, oh, if only I knew, or wasn't afraid to ask, because I had a male chair umpire. So you know, these are things that people don't realize that female athletes are dealing with, because, you know, we have things that don't work well all the time, and you have men in the chair, and you don't know how to pose the question or ask the question of what I need to change. So it's you know, it's hopefully it's better, and the players out there today are a lot more progressive than we were in the 80s or the 90s for that matter. But you know, it's we just need to have more conversations like this, and feel more empowered. But hopefully this conversation has been empowering and inspiring, and hopefully if people have not read the book, they get the book and learn a lot more about the conversation that we've had.
That's wonderful. And that's a
That's a
wonderful
good
place
timing.
to
This is that emergency
go.
emergency test that we talked about.
Is that right? Yes, that's great.
I'll
I
take
have,
this time to jump in
go ahead.
here,
Go
and
ahead.
we can open this up to an audience Q&A. First, I want to thank you both so much for this conversation, for your honesty, your willingness to share, your willingness to ask tough questions. It has been remarkable to sit here and listen to both of you. So thank you so much. And it's not over yet because we have some wonderful questions in the chat. And in fact, we have time for even more questions in the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to send in your question yet, please do so. We're going to start with Jay Bishop, who has said, "You are a global leader in sport and an inspiration to so many, including me. My favorite comment you made today was how you flipped the script on sport when you are young to say you are the ones missing out. Can you talk about some of your failures, how you bounced back from them, and what you learned? Thank you, Jay Bishop."
Hi, Jennifer. I know who Jay Bishop is. Thank you from Canada. You know, I think when you talk about failures, you know, I don't like to use the word fail. I wasn't successful in whatever I was trying to accomplish. So I like to say I haven't failed at anything, but you know, we can't win everything. And you know, there's always something that you're fighting for that you don't get. So whether it's an election, or you know, a partnership that we're trying to get that we didn't get. For me, it's always about going back to the drawing board or communicating with your team. You know, you got to go back to the team and figure out what we could do better, and make sure that we are stronger the next time we move forward. I don't like to walk away from anything feeling that I can't go back and get it. And so communication is first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier with Damon, and making sure that, yeah, I'm gonna get this the next time, whatever it is. So it's not one specific thing that I can talk about in failing or not winning, if you will. But for me, it's about, yeah, I didn't get that this time, but you better believe I'm going to give it my all the next time, and make sure that I'm even more prepared when I go back to the table.
Thank you for that answer. We have a couple more questions. We have two from Audrey, and I'm going to start with Audrey's second question first, and then we'll get to her first one. So she asks if you keep refining and building your leadership toolkit, or if you find that the most important tools remain the same to you, for example, the ownership framework that you've outlined.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, Audrey has thanked you for this inspiring and frank conversation, and she wants to know about your leadership toolkit, which is to say, which tools do you use as a leader that are the most important to you? Have those stayed the same over the time, or are they evolving? And she's given an example, which is the ownership framework that
Yeah,
you.
no, thank you for that, Audrey. I think everything we do, we're evolving. Even if things are staying the same, they're evolving. And so I would say my most important tool is the communication. It's learning how to communicate better, perhaps. I think follow-up is most important, how we follow up, depending on what we're looking to accomplish. how we're networking with one another, how we are looking to, what is it that we're looking to gain out of the follow-up? Is it just to stay in touch? Is it to enhance an opportunity that we are seeking? Or is it just to say thank you? And so the communication, I think, is something that we can always refine and evolve, which is also a way of changing our behavior or evolving our behavior. I always like to say in anything in being a leader, it's about keeping it simple with the ABCs. So it's being accountable, it's being bold or changing our behavior, and it's being collaborative with our communication.
Thank you for that answer. I'm writing down ABCs as I move
Okay.
on to the next one because I think that's so applicable to the
And
work
the,
we're doing
and the
with
other
hiring.
A is being actionable. So actionable and accountable behavior and being bold in the approach, being collaborative with your communication,
What's D?
being
I'm kidding.
disciplined, being dedicated.
All right, excellent. You've got the whole alphabet ready for us.
You can go through it. There we go.
I want to ask Audrey's second question as well. She says that Katrina, you've conquered so many domains. What field is next?
Oh, I like that. Thank you for that. You know, I've been on so many nonprofit boards that I'm looking to land a good spot on a private or for-profit board to continue to hone my skills in the professional world. And you know, and learn. I mean, we're always evolving. We can always learn more. We can always contribute. So I wear a lot of different hats as an author, as a speaker, as a broadcaster, as a commentator, but I still want to evolve in the business world, but more so in a board setting so I can continue to do all the work that I do. I do run a nonprofit youth program, the Harlem Junior Tennis and Education Program. So that's really where my heart is. That's where my passion is, with the kids and continuing to reach back and pull forward.
Thank you for these answers, Katrina. We have 6 minutes left, and we're still waiting for more questions to come in through the chat. But fortunately, Damon, I believe you said you had 10 more questions that you wanted
I
to
have
ask.
I
So
have
if
plenty
you'd
of
like to
questions
pull
for
those out now,
Katrina.
yeah, yeah,
That's right, but
the floor is
most of them
yours.
are anyway. So no current book author program is complete without asking an artificial intelligence question, an AI question. And the USTA, as you already, of course, know, they've been using Watson, IBM Watson for several years now. And you mentioned how you were using AI to detail several different metrics, right? To servicing players, et cetera. So my question is, where do you see that going now? And what's the next step for that in terms of helping players? And is data an issue now that coaching is allowed? And what kind of data might be allowed to be accessed? So that's my interesting question about where AI can take the game of tennis, because other people may not know coaching wasn't allowed in the last few years. It's a couple of years it's been allowed now. So
I mean, only, you know, you never know where technology is going to go. It's evolving every year. It's evolving every day, right? Right now, something else is being created. So I think only sky is the limit where it goes. It's very interesting as to where it is right now. I mean, you know, when I look at AI right now and how it's being utilized and taking data and the stats, I mean, the data and the calls on the court with electronic line calling, they're actually putting commentary together, computerized commentary, you know, which is going to take my job. Don't take my job. Don't take the job. But it can be utilized at the lower level tournaments, right, to provide commentary that isn't affordable for some of those tournaments. So that's an asset, I believe, that these lower level tournaments can now have commentary that's coming their way. So as far as the coaching is concerned, I think it's obviously valuable to the coach as well as the player. to be able to give you the data and the stats that are necessary to give you things that you can't see with the naked eye because you're focused on something else. So, that data has been given and provided for many years now, a couple of decades that you've had access to. It's just giving it to you. So it's so refined right now that you as a coach are able to provide this information to your player. But I do think sometimes it's too much data to be able to provide the player because you don't know what to focus on.
And another question I have, unless someone else has a question, I've got another question about tennis and tennis as a sport really hasn't had a union, right? They've now have the Professional Tennis Players Association. I don't know if you call that a union or not, but how closely does the USTA and ITF work with the PTPA?
With the PTPA?
The Professional Tennis Players Association? Yeah.
I don't think that hasn't really evolved yet, right?
Well, it's moving, and I see them at events, right? I see some of the representatives at events. So I don't know if there's some behind the scenes working, or if they're connecting with the ITF or the USTA or any of these organizational bodies at all.
Yeah, I'm not in those discussions. I'm pretty sure that there have been meetings or things that have happened between the organizations, but I'm not in those, so I'm not really sure where they've gone with those.
And one final thing I'll ask. You mentioned handshakes and humanizing. Seems like you want to reestablish or reinvigorate the humanizing aspect of competition between players. And if I'm read it correctly, you feel like a little bit of that's been lost over time, maybe over the last couple of generations, what have you. Where do you see that going? Is there some sort of future implementation to sort of continue to get players to be a little bit more hospitable to each other before the match starts, like in public on the court? Now, you said it's probably impossible to get players to shake hands before the match, but something.
Yeah, you know what? I think, I think when you look at tennis and you look at history, you kind of follow where it's come from, right? So it's been a sport that you never shook hands before the match. Your friends walking until the moment you walk on the court, right? And then you walk on the court and then you're like this. But you're laughing and talking all the way up until it's game time, pretty much, until you walk out of the locker room almost. So I think if there was something that it changed, I don't think players would have an issue. Even if they just tapped rackets at the net before they started, even if maybe it's not a shaking of the hand, but to kind of tap the racket when you're at the net, they're hugging each other to take photos. So why not just tap the racket and maybe kind of show that? I think that would be pretty cool to do that. And then you do the shaking of the hands or the hugging or whatever after the match. I would love to see that implemented and started as juniors. You got to start in the junior level to where it becomes a natural once you become professionals. But, kids idolize the professionals. So if we have to start it at the pros, so the kids say, oh my God, Alcaraz or, Djokovic are doing this, and I want to do it too.
Oh, wonderful. That's absolutely correct. And I see we're just at time. So before we get ushered off, I want to say, Katrina, it's been an honor and a pleasure. And it's always a delight to see you. You know that because I tell you that every time I see you. And it's true. It's absolutely true. And so this has been a wonderful occasion for me, and I hope everyone else has enjoyed it. Please continue to look forward, check out the even if it's an author programs for the American Library in Paris. And I will turn it back over to Emilie to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for this excellent conversation. And Damon, thank you for that wonderful closing. There's not much left for me to say except to extend and echo this thanks to the audience who joined us tonight on Zoom, and to encourage you to come visit us in person if possible. We host these events 2 to 3 times a week. They're available online and in person sometimes. So tomorrow you'll be able to tune in online to watch our event with W. David Marks and BJ Novak on status and culture. Next week we'll be hosting a very exciting event about exploring American voices in poetry, in painting, and trying to locate the spirit of modernism. So we're all over the board in terms of our themes, but our main subject of inquiry is the French and American intellectual spirit, which was so deftly and beautifully explored tonight. So thank you so much again, Katrina and Damon. And finally, as a last note for our audience, we are an independent nonprofit institution. Conversations like this are made entirely possible thanks to your generous donations. So if you'd like to donate, we'll be sending you a link in order for you to do so. Thank you in advance for your generosity. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you so much again, Katrina and Damon. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.